I have a kind of a two-part question. The first one is, there are a number of these bankers who have influence within the IMF and the World Bank, and we know very much through what we've learned in the past many months how they've gamed the system in our banking industry. How do we know they're not going to be doing something similar globally using the IMF and the World Bank? The other part of the question is, these banks clearly have become a monopoly within our system, and we have laws on the books about monopolies, and why are we not applying those laws at this point?
Well, let me take the second question first. I think that is a very important point about monopoly, and I think that's something you should be emphasizing to all your elected representatives at all levels of government, which is there are very powerful monopoly elements in what these banks do and the way they operate in particular markets, for example. And these have not raised flags under the traditional way of operating the Federal Reserve and the Department of Justice that this needs to be looked at. I think the Department of Justice should be pulled before Congress, basically on a weekly interviews, and asked repeatedly, why are you not bringing antitrust charges against these biggest banks? I'm absolutely serious about this. I think this is a very important way forward, and the Department of Justice and, for example, the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC, are moving slowly in some practices in the financial sector. You see this in the SEC case, Big Goldman Sachs, which is a criminal part of and referred to the Department of Justice. But they need to do more, and I think pursuing the monopoly aspect of this business is very important. On the first question, look, you're exactly right. The pressure, the political power of the banks runs through the U.S. administration and from the administration to the IMF and to the World Bank. But for the purposes that you're interested in, the IMF is an important aspect. And the bailout handed out Europe this weekend was a very good example of a system that continues to operate in a really dangerous manner. Now, the European situation is complicated. We've written various pieces about it on our website, and we can talk about that in more detail if you're interested. The basic point of your question is, of course there's negatives for forward. This is a global system. What was special about this particular loop is it was very American banks and American borrowers. Next time around, it needs to be our big American banks and, for example, Chinese borrowers, Indian borrowers, or Brazilian borrowers, creating an entirely global mess. And again, ending up with both a lot of lost income for us and big taxpayer bill.
Thank you. And Abe Jacobsen.
Yes, I'd like to focus on a different aspect of this. We think of the public losing to the banks via our TARP expenditures and via the various gifts that the Fed windows have given to the banks. But I'd like you to comment and maybe get quantitative about another aspect, which is for many of us who are boring small investors and who want to be boring, we are savers. We try to save in boring, uninteresting instruments. There was a time when we could sort of no-brainer get inflation plus 3% from reasonably safe, reasonably stable investment instruments. Now, basically, the Bernanke policy of free money for the large banks means that ordinary little people like us are not able to keep up with inflation. And would you care, just as an economist, to sort of quantify this and get some numbers out there to help us? How much are we helping the banks? How much of an income transfer is this from the middle class to the financial manipulators?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and actually a very sophisticated question, because it's exactly the primary way in which banks are allowed to rebuild their balance sheets and make profits in this situation. Partly it's through the explicit government bailouts, the TARP money, partly it's through the supported economy, through the fiscal stimulus and so on. But in very large part, it's through paying zero or very low interest rates on deposits and being able to charge significantly higher interest rates on loans. So this positive spread that they can make in today's situation is accounting for a very large part of their profits. I don't have the exact numbers for you, but I think I should write about that on my website for the next few days. I'll try to do that. But this transfer from savers like yourselves to some extent to borrowers, but you notice that the borrowing rates have not come down anywhere near as much as the rates on deposit. So a large part of the difference goes to the banks. And basically you are subsidizing the banks. That's exactly what you're doing. And you're doing it with very little reform. So it's not just allowing the banks to recapitalize themselves, it's allowing them to go back to their previous models of business. Their previous models of business are high risk, very dangerous. They pay themselves very big bonuses. I'm sure you noticed that. They take out a lot of cash. And they set themselves up for, the banks up for further failure, at the same time as the individuals involved do incredibly well. 2008 was a good year for Wall Street compensation. 2009 was an even better year, in part because of all the measures the government took, including the essentially zero short-term interest rate. So when you put this all together, you really saved the banking system. The banking system was in very bad shape. It had to be saved in some fashion, but it did not have to be saved exactly as it was by both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, with no effective changes in the way the banks are governed, the way the banks are run, no changes even in the top people. No CEOs fired, no boards of directors fired by the Obama administration. That was completely unnecessary. And saying we'll save everyone now and then we'll reform them later, was honestly a very unrealistic assessment by the Obama administration. Because of course, once you've saved them, they become politically powerful again. They have a lot of money to spend. The financial service industry has been spending $1.4 million a day fighting us, people like you and people like me, and politicians, those politicians who want to push for reform. $1.4 million a day against reform, when 4 or 5 lobbyists per member of Congress against reform. Well, of course it's an uphill battle in those circumstances, and of course they are taking money from you in many different ways as a result of this.